Hello, I'm Emily Peyton. I'm a candidate for governor, and I'm here with Ralph Corbo, who is a candidate for lieutenant governor, is that right?
Oh, yes.
And I want to thank once again PEG TV and Chelsea and Chris for helping us bring this show to you. Today's show is called Democracy Dies in the Darkness of Closed Debates. And so we're going to talk about this topic, Ralph and I, and we both have some experience with it. So Ralph, do you want to start with some of your experiences? Or?
Sure. We'll set the stage for this. Unfortunately, it's not very good news for the democratic process in Vermont. This goes back to 2018, it all started. A lot of people may not be aware of this because it's all goes on a lot behind the scenes. So in 2006, actually, let me say in 2016, I was heavily involved in the campaign process, being one of the co-campaign managers for Bill Spaceman Lee for governor under the Liberty Union Party banner. And we wound up, in that capacity, we wound up going around to a lot of different debates all across the state and through at different media sites that were hosting these debates. And it was pretty much an open system, open invitation for all the candidates on the ballot. Even if you weren't Democrat or Republican, you could be sure that you would be allowed to come to the debates and be part of the process. In 2018, big things started to change on that. We had, starting off, we had Holly Groschner, who was then the current CEO of Vermont Public Television, decided to reach out to Vermont Public Radio. This happened at a time when a new CEO for Vermont Public Radio moved up here from West Virginia and took over Vermont Public Radio. I don't know what the connections were that she might have had with him previously, but it seemed like as soon as he moved in to his new position, she reached out to him and said about coordinating. They started talking about coordinating the statewide open invitation debates that used to be mainly just the province of being run by Vermont Public Television as far as video debates, because of course Vermont Public Radio had for a long time had live radio debates. So Holly Groschner reaches out to Scott Finn, the new CEO of Vermont Public Radio, and they get into discussions, and it turns out that they're going to coordinate the production of the live video debates. And in that process, Holly Groschner gives Scott Finn and his news department the power to make the decisions of how it's going to be managed. And Scott Finn, who has a very, very limited outlook on what constitutes the democratic process when it comes to debates, decided that in the live debates, there would only be the Democratic and Republican candidates. No alternative party or independent candidates would be allowed in his new capacity as producing the statewide live video debates.
Yep, so we used to have, at the end of every election cycle, there used to be a Vermont Public Television debate right before the election, and then, of course, we had mail-in ballots, so that sort of undermined that. But everybody was featured, and it was a chance for the corporate candidates, the two candidates, to be challenged, and that was minimal. But I have to say that this issue of the freedom of press being applied to censor candidates has been going back further than 2018.
Oh, yeah.
And in my experience, when I began running in 2010 specifically, to encourage understanding of a public bank and financial methods to create fairness in Vermont, I found that there were specific ways that the election was being rigged behind the scene with coordination with the press. So the press had direct connections with the two chairs, and they would either mock a candidate or they would feature the candidates that the chairs felt either candidate would do corporate's bidding. So I saw many manifestations of this, and I'd like to get into some of those examples as we go forward. You remember some of them? Or-
Yeah, well, let me just expound on what you said. Yes, in fact, it does even go back further than 2018 in the sense that VPR's live radio debates, even going back to like maybe 2010, 2008, they've always been restricted. They've always had a policy at Vermont Public Radio of their live radio debates were always just restricted in the general election to just the Democratic and Republican candidates. The problem became when Holly Groshner of Vermont Public Television decided that she wanted to coordinate the previous debates that her entity presided over and bring them into one sort of consolidated entity with Vermont Public Radio. And by giving that power over to Scott Finn for the decision-making process, they just basically went with the policy that they'd been having all along, when especially had come to their radio debates there. They were always restricted.
Right, so it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg. So they will say that, oh, if you don't get a 5% in the last election, then we can't cover you. So the problem is if they're only featuring the two candidates, then there's no way to get a coverage. And I think it's really important for people to understand that there are alternatives that provide a lot of depth and a lot of policy, because what elections really ought to be about is about the direction that we go, and people who run have passion and they have ideas that may be considered by the whole of Vermont and may be good. So for example, for me in 2016, I had run twice, and the second time I came in a distant third, and I recognized that the Secretary of State was not going to allow me to run as an independent. They will not allow you to run as an independent, and they will not allow you to partake in the primary unless you choose a side. So I chose a Republican side, and there was nobody else running. But so the Republicans were concerned because I would be featured as the primary candidate. And at the very last minute, they got Scott Milne to come in. Now, I had at that point more experience. I had an in-depth platform, including public banking and a number of other things. And yet, within 2 weeks, what they did was they began to label him as the top-tier candidate.
Oh, yeah.
So every single news story named Scott Milne as the top-tier candidate. VPR. There was no public poll which placed him as a top-tier candidate. There was nothing except for the money and the power of the Republican Party. And they pushed that. Scott's a top-tier candidate, and they left me out of coverage completely. And they felt like they had the right to do so because of their freedoms of press. And what's interesting is looking closely at the freedoms of the press. The freedoms of the press specifically they are derived from people's right to free speech. So therefore, the press has freedom of speech. But sadly, we're in a situation where the press has become so powerful that they are limiting the access of candidates who the public have put on and should be equally considered. And this is really a bad thing for democracy, because now the only candidates that will get featured, you'll get a selection of one or two, are the ones that will do corporate bidding, the corporate elites bidding. And we see that in this election, and both will do mandatory vaccines.
Yeah, expound on that again. Like you said, the major parties get very worried when they see somebody in their primary who isn't part of their establishment. Like you said, that happened with you. That happened with Boots Wardinski in 2016 when he was running for, in the Progressive Party for their governor's nomination. They sent out an email, whoever was the head of the Progressive Party at the time sent out an email that said, we need about 300 regular Progressive Party voters to take the Progressive Party ballot and by doing that, take that ballot and go in and vote, put a write-in vote under governor for I believe it was, yeah, it had to be, who was it at that time? David Zuckerman? Maybe not. Anyway, put in their own candidate, person that was running in the Democratic primary as a hybrid candidate, progressive Democrat. Make sure they got them the progressive nomination also by having about 300 people being notified through email to make sure they took a progressive ballot at the primary poll and write in the name of that progressive establishment Progressive Party candidate so that Boots Wardinski would not get the Progressive Party nomination.
Right.
And as we see, it happened again this year with Chris Erickson running in the Progressive Party.
Yes.
Also, that has happened, that they also did the same thing, sending out emails saying, take the ballots for Progressive Party, about 300 of you, write in David Zuckerman so that Chris Erickson will not get the Progressive Party nomination for governor.
Yes, that's one of the tricks.
Yeah.
And back in, I don't know whether it was 2014, it might have been 2014 or 2016, I was working with a camera, and I took a lot of footage, and I was producing video, and I do want the public to know that the reason that I do not want to be part of the legislature is that I do want an entirely new direction so that we have an economy that's based on compassion, not based on the profiteering and control. I want to help people organize for sovereignty. So that's happening more and more, and that is why I have always done a gubernatorial run, and that is why I've never climbed the ranks, so to speak. I didn't want to be part of those ranks because I don't see them as supporting humanity, rather supporting corporations. But going back to this one time, there were these debates, and I had, there was one at the Leahy Center, and I was an independent, and they were only going to have the two candidates. And I went to it with my camera to film, and they let me in thinking that I was press. They didn't recognize me. And I went in, and then when I sat down, of course, the two candidates knew who I was. And I said, oh, you shouldn't be here.
Oh.
And the director of news, tried to pull me away, and I kept my camera rolling, and we had a discussion, and on camera, he admitted that he had a private agreement.
Mm-hmm.
He had a private agreement with the two parties to limit the debate to the two different parties. Now, you will see in the last show, I just read the Article 7, which says that government shall not be for a subset of people, for the emolument, the betterment of a subset. But this is exactly what has been going on in this. And it's mostly through censorship. Vermont Digger is the worst. They will either mock you or they will pretend you're not there. And it's very, very easy to mock a credible candidate. In my case, they'd say, they'd imply that I was a conspiracy theorist when I was just looking at elements where the good of the people had not been followed by corporate interests. So either that or I talked to animals, and it was very easy to paint me as a whack job. It's very easy to do that. And that's what they do.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really sad because it narrows the conversation, and we don't get all the ideas and all the conversation that should be. So we're not seeing the concerns that government has not been providing for our welfare, providing for the health of the people properly. We're not seeing those challenges to government because the discussion has been limited so much.
Yeah, and it's really so ironic and counterproductive because so many times you'll see essays in the press or opinion pieces by people who are like head of some of these media organizations lamenting the fact that, maybe people aren't participating
yeah.
as they should be in the voting process, they're not participating in the political process, they'll call out young people for being apathetic. Well, you, as those media heads that are saying this, if you're instituting these kind of policies that discourage candidates, is it any surprise that people are apathetic, then become apathetic to politics, and especially young people, that they see that what this rigged process is about, and that they don't have any chance? Why wouldn't they become apathetic? They're basically bemoaning it on one point, one side, and at the same time they're conducting their policies to make it so, you know?
That's right. I mean, before, I used to be able to write letters to the editor, and that was one way that I would reach readers. And this year, however, and before, I will add that papers would reach out to me and write articles, and yes, they would, most of them would leave out the salient points, you know, the points that I wanted to get across about, you know, how we could do a monetary system that put more money in service for us, you know. So essentially, I was a candidate that was going to bring more money into circulation through these financial mechanisms, and they would only cover the candidates who would convince people to part with their money. So I was representing a constituency that generally doesn't get involved because they've already been betrayed by government in so many ways. It was only the two corporate candidates, of course, only service their constituents that pay for them. So it is a problem, and I wanted to say that now I cannot write a letter to the editor. They will not publish it because they say, because I'm a candidate, I have to buy advertising. Nor there's only been one paper that's contacted me to make an article. So they're not writing any articles, so you don't have any idea of the work that I'm doing or the work that other candidates are doing. And I tell you, I'm all over the state meeting with people, and you have no idea through the regular press what we've been doing. And that's a problem.
Yeah, going back again, expounding on the historical facts of these unfortunate events. I believe probably when you were at that Leahy Center, that probably was a debate probably sponsored by WPTZ, NBC5. I would
Channel
bet.
5, yep.
Yeah, because that's where they usually conduct it.
Yeah.
And talking again about 2018, when all of this suddenly hit the fan, if you remember, it's not that I led the protests, but I sort of like decided to show up there. In 2018, in October,
Rutland here. Yeah.
I went to the Paramount Theater in
Right.
downtown Rutland there, where Ann Galloway and her Vermont Digger
Yep.
were hosting the governor's debate.
Yep.
Okay, and of course, as Vermont Digger's policy, which is very much in line, like the way Scott Finn runs his VPR policy, she will only invite the Democrat and Republican candidates. And Charles Laramie, who was an independent candidate for governor, showed up. You showed up at that outside, as I was protesting with a sign outside, wanting to know why. My sign basically wanted to know why there were 7 certified candidates for governor on the Secretary of State's a list that had all done their due diligence to be
Right.
qualified as a candidate, and yet Vermont Digger was only allowing the audience to listen to 2 of them, the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah. Vermont Digger, I don't believe deserve their nonprofit status.
Right.
They have done, they've done a good deal of slander. Of course, you're allowed to slander a public figure, but they've been very undemocratic. And here's the new thing that is happening with 7 Days and Vermont Digger, and I think also VPR, except for on Facebook, is that they have disabled the comments.
Oh, yeah.
So that now nobody has any idea if people don't oppose whatever's being printed. And of course, they control whether there's any letters to the editor. And additionally, Front Porch Forum is very censoring. They're censoring people who want to discuss any elements of this lockdown that might be unconstitutional. So, the freedom of speech is under enormous attack. And of course, one of the symbols of the masks is to muzzle people, one of the symbols is to look at each other and see, oh my God, there's something going on that's way different. And another element is this symbolic muzzling. So I wanted to say that in, I think it was 2016 or in between cycles, I went to the State House because they were working on the election rules. And I went in there and I said, well, for the good of the people, and the people are putting these candidates on the ballot, you would think that that's who they want. They always say it's because I think all voices should be participating. So I introduced an amendment to the election rules that anybody who had gotten onto the ballot would be invited to any public forum or debate that was purporting to put forward candidates for whatever race that was, and that everybody had to be invited and be allowed to participate as long as they behaved with decorum. So they had an out if somebody was being ridiculous, they could ask them to leave. And they considered that for a minute. And then they said, let's ask the ACLU. And the ACLU people came in. This was the House committee.
Right.
And said that you're going to be sued by the press if you make it so that everybody who's a candidate on the ballot is allowed to participate in forums. So then they called in the Burlington Free Press, who said that they would sue the legislature if they made a rule that all the candidates that you, the people, put on the ballot in order to participate equally were actually allowed and were treated as equals by these forums and public debates. Now, that's wholly absurd. But you should know that's what's going on behind the scenes. So, of course, the committee were like, oh, and it became an unfriendly amendment. They tabled it. So you need to know that behind the scenes, there is a lot of rigging of these elections, and you are only shown two candidates that, of course, you want to choose a winner or somebody that has the possibility for winning. But right now, we're working on organizing for a transformation according to Article 7 of how we do governance. So we're not oppressed by taxation. We're not oppressed by many of the ways that government oppresses us through a myriad of ways.
That example that you gave speaks to the fact of how the mainstream media is so in tight with the two establishment parties that they want to ensure that there are no alternative voices that would sort of buck whatever the two establishment candidates are talking about, which the two establishment candidates, their interests are mainly focused into the radical capitalist system, especially when it comes to economics in this country, that
That's right.
favors the rich and the powerful.
Yes.
Because as long as they can keep that type of system going, the rich and the powerful will always have sway over the rest of us, whether it's middle class, lower middle class, lower class. That's one of the reasons they do that. And
Yep.
and to expound on how to counteract that is when I was running for U.S. House of Representatives, one of my planks was that I would, if I could possibly get into the U.S. House of Representatives and influence them to put down a law as part of the FCC regulations, any license given out to any type of radio or TV entity, in the license will be written that entity has assigned that when the general election season comes, you must devote 2 months give available free airtime to all the candidates to
Right.
whenever they need it to go on and give their platform and their presentation. And this at the same time would not only ensure the democratic process of full open elections, but would also eliminate the corporate campaign contribution and PAC controversy that is so much involved now when we talk about election reform and stuff. No, it would be not necessary anymore for huge contributions so people could go and pay for all this advertising and on-air time that they need. If it's part of the FCC rules that any type of media outlet has to, as part of their being allowed to operate, has to give that certain amount of airtime prior to the general election for all candidates, we
Yeah.
could eliminate all that.
Well, I mean, sadly, the reality is the FCC is a totally captured
Right,
agency.
well, yeah.
And so I think that anybody who gets elected is also captured. And if they aren't captured by the corporate agenda, they will either be rejected or they will be ostracized enough so they will not be able to participate. And we see candidates that leave once they've gotten elected because they can't, they won't bend to the corporate agenda that happens when you are elected. So I think really that our hope moving forward is that we're gelling our authority, our sovereign authority, understanding how to step into our sovereign power through groups and through assemblies. And as those grow, because, government has not protected us from any of the ills, never mind. I mean, I don't have to list them: climate change, drug use, student debt. I mean, go on and on. Injustice, racial injustice. There's so many ways that government has failed us, specifically because it's in service to a monetary system that is not, that's using money as personal power rather than money to encourage, reward, compassion, and virtue, and things for the good of all. So getting a monetary system that rewards the good of all and discourages anything like ruthlessness or greed is the step where humanity is heading towards. I wanted to share also that in one of those cycles, I filed a suit. I think it was the same cycle that I had gotten the footage of that place, and also a bunch of other places that were limiting the debates. So I filed a suit to participate on the basis of freedom of speech, and I wrote it out, and I filed it in Burlington, and the judge said, and it was an emergency injunction to be able to participate for all the reasons of democracy, and the judge just sat on it. He didn't rule until after it. And then he called me in and he wanted to see, because I had made a cogent argument. He wanted to meet me. But he said, well, you didn't win, it's sour grapes.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, we really, and running, people have really misunderstood the reason why I'm participating. And I'm participating so that we all become involved in our future and understand that we have a right to design an economy and to design a methodology of self-governance that serves the good of all. We have that right, and to give people the encouragement and to what extent they want the guidance of how to do that. I think that celebrity candidates or celebrity people are useless. We are all stars and we all contribute. So we're getting near rounding out. We've got a minute and a half left. I mean, there are many ways that we can do elections in a fair way. We could have the cable access people have a debate in each county, and then we could put it up on, with all the candidates. We could put it up on YouTube. We could have the transcripts in the newspapers. That would support the newspapers. There's many ways that we can present candidates in a fair way. We could also present ideas that, or policies that the people select or elect, and then select the leaders or the people that they want to enact it. I mean, there's many ways that we can do better than the two candidates that can get the most money out of your pockets and the corporate different parties.
Well, yeah, I endorse that type of method. I mean, you have to, when it's this serious, you have to come at it from a lot of different angles. Myself personally, what I've been doing, and I encourage people out there, if they really feel concerned about the fact that they're losing the ability to see all the candidates, one of the ways to try to change the system is you have to let the people at the top know that you're not going to stand for it. So you got to
Right.
get on the phone, or you got to get on the email and contact Ann Galloway at Vermont Digger,
Right,
Scott Finn and Sarah Ashworth
yeah,
at Vermont Public Radio, Michael LaFleche, the
Yeah.
news director at WPTZ
yeah,
NBC5.
we're almost out.
You have to let them know.
Right. Let them know. It's for the good of all. Thank you.
Thanks.